Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. I'm Joseph Casa. This presentation is a back to school month special. September is back to school. So what I want to talk about is what happened after I moved from industry to academia and joined University of Maryland University College in 1997 after 20 years in systems and software engineering and project management in industry. At UMUC, I was responsible for postgraduate classes in systems and software engineering, both face-to-face and asynchronous online via WebTyco. UMUC got its start with the GI Bill after World War II and had been in distance education for more than 40 years. There was no defined body of knowledge for systems engineering. Classes were lecture-based. There was reports of students having problems understanding technical topics from books and notes. So my goal was to increase the effectiveness of educating systems and software engineers. This presentation discusses some of the complex problems involved in creating information technology related postgraduate education and lifelong learning environments, some of the data obtained and the results achieved, and some of the systems thinking tools I developed to help solve the complex problems. And I'm going to start with a need to create a Master of Software Engineering degree in 1998. And it had to be online as well as face-to-face. So the topics I'm going to talk about are 8 little-known systems thinking tools for remedying complex problems, the problem formulation template, the copycat, Continuum of Solutions, Don't Care, Conceptual reference model, the holistic thinking perspectives, active brainstorming, and the compliance matrix. And then I'm briefly going to talk about how you might be able to develop the skills to use the 8 tools and others. And by the way, the tools are in the systems thinking toolbox. First tool I'm going to talk about is the problem formulation template. It's a 5-part tool that helps understanding the problem and thinking through the problem-solving process to create the solution. And so we consider the undesirable situation as perceived from the holistic thinking perspectives. I'll talk about that later. The assumptions about the situation, problem, solution, constraints, and so on, because the assumptions are critical. If the assumptions are wrong, the solution will be wrong, or might not even work. And then the feasible, conceptual, future desirable situation, and then the problem. What needs to be done to convert the FCFDS to reality in reverse order? And the solution is how the undesirable situation will be remedied at the planning stage, or was remedied if you're talking about it later. The solution has to be interoperable with evolving adjacent systems over the operational life of the solution and adjacent systems, and it's made of 2 interdependent parts: the transition process and the solution system operating in the context of the desirable situation. Let me give you an example of the problem formulation template. You can see a digital watch. Well, the undesirable situation is my watch has stopped working. And so the need is to make the watch work. Now, I haven't written it in a functional way as to have a device on my wrist that will tell me the correct time. When I write it as the need to make the watch work, I'm precluding solutions that involve throwing the watch away and getting another one. And so defining the right need frames the problem and leads to the correct solution at the time. Defining the wrong need leads to the wrong solution. The assumptions are the battery has reached the end of its lifespan. I know that most times a watch stops working, it's because the battery is flat. So my FCFDS is my watch is working again, and not only that, the time shown is correct. The problem, working back from the answer, is place the watch on the wrist. Before I can do that, I have to close up the watch. Before I do that, I have to insert the new battery with the correct polarity. Before that, I have to obtain a replacement battery. Before that, I have to remove the back of the watch and take the old battery out. Before that, I have to find a tool that will allow me to remove the back of the watch. And the solution is how I replace the battery, each step one at a time, working forwards. So let's look at the problem formulation template as used in my situation. The undesirable situation was the need for me to create and direct a Master of Software Engineering degree. The assumptions were UMUC could and would teach and administer the degree. Future continuing student enrollments would be sufficient to enable the degree to generate income. Otherwise, there's no point in running the degree. FCFDS is a world-class Master of Software Engineering degree in operations with 4 measures of effectiveness. They are less than 2 student complaints per semester in total, about class schedules, quality of teaching, or content of what was being taught. The problem is what needs to be done to create the required MSWE degree in reverse order, and the solution was how it was created. So let's move on to the next systems thinking tool, the copycat. When you're faced with a problem, what's the first thing you do once the problem is understood? And this is something that's not generally taught. You ask yourself the question, who's faced this problem before? What was their solution? And this is similar to the use of a legal precedent in law, or TRIZ, if you know what that is. And then you ask the third question, which is the critical question. Can this solution be modified for my situation? And note, the question is not, can this solution be used in my situation? Because if you ask that question, it generally becomes a yes and no answer. The solution you've observed gets plugged into your situation and the change fails. By asking the question, can the solution be modified for my situation? It helps frame the correct problem. It allows you to examine the differences and similarities in the situation. It allows you to examine the similarities and differences in the situations, and then you modify the other solution so it will work in your situation, and that approach generally provides success. So let's look at the copycat in my specific situation. Who's faced this problem before? Other universities who created and offer masters in software engineering. So I looked around and found 19 universities, 15 in the US, 1 in the UK, and 3 in Australia. And there was a representative mixture, different approaches to teaching software engineering. There were differences in the sizes, there were differences in courses taught, and there was differences in the ratio of core courses that must be taken to electives. So what was their solution? Well, their solutions were in the syllabi published on the websites showing the offerings. So I was able to get a good look at what was going on. I did the benchmarking, and the results are in the handouts for this presentation because I don't have time to go through it. The results in hidden slides in the handout provide a historical snapshot of what was being taught at the time. And it's really interesting, but I don't have time to talk about it in this presentation, so get the handouts and take a look if you're interested. What are the processes for crafting a degree? Well, the first one seemed to be faculty capability. Benchmark what other universities are offering, bundle the common modules with modules the faculty can teach, and offer that as a degree. And I found the same with systems engineering when I did a similar benchmark in 2013. Not a very good way of doing it. On the other hand, benchmarking allows you to benchmark the other universities, aggregate the topics, and then position yourself on top of the normal distribution curve of the topics, which gives you the ability to teach most common topics. It gives you a Me Too degree, but it's done. So once you've understood the problem and you're starting to deal with it, here's the next systems thinking tool, which is the Continuum of Solutions. In the Continuum of Solutions, in non-systems thinking, there's a single correct solution, 1 and 1 is 2, and every other solution is wrong. The systems thinking approach is more adaptable. There isn't a single correct solution. There are acceptable solutions, feasible solutions, optimal solutions, and unacceptable solutions. And they show up on a continuum like so, up between unacceptable, acceptable, and optimal. A similar continuum shows up for the answers to questions. In non-systems thinking, the answers are yes and no. These give you deterministic answers. On the other hand, in systems thinking, you get yes and no in the same way, but you also get it depends, which allows for a dialogue to flesh out what it depends on. And then you get don't know or unknown, which dissolves Schrodinger's cat's paradox. And then you get the don't care. And this gives you a continuum that looks like this. No at one end, yes at the other, and don't know or probability in the middle. And you see that on the Likert scale, which allows you to measure responses to surveys in strongly disagree all the way through to strongly agree. While I talked about the don't care answer to the question, let me introduce the don't care tool. It simplifies dealing with objective complexity by abstracting out irrelevant entities and behavior. But they need to be identified as don't care, because when something isn't identified, it's ambiguous. It can either be not relevant or forgotten. It removes the need for a sensitivity analysis. If the decision between two outcomes are almost identical, traditionally we do a sensitivity analysis. By using the don't care, we say, well, either will be acceptable. It doesn't matter. We don't care. Unless further selection criteria are used, either new criteria or we adjust the score in an existing one. And this allows design decisions to be made to facilitate stakeholder wishes. For example, we have choices between A and B in a decision matrix, and they're almost the same. Choice A precludes a stakeholder wish. Choice B allows a stakeholder wish. All else being equal, we select choice B. Why not? We can end up with a happier stakeholder. So coming back to the benchmarking of Master of Software Engineering degrees, when I aggregated the views, I found 3 solutions to the problem of what to teach in a Master of Software Engineering degree. There was the functional differentiation of body of knowledge by these institutions. There was an all-elective advisor-student defined curriculum from these institutions in which the student picked courses from different degrees. And then there was the mathematical logic language theoretical approach from these institutions. And this now brings me to the conceptual reference model. the general conceptual model in the non-systems approach, it's observe activities being performed, understand the situation. These are the activities and the reasons they're being performed, and create the model based on the activities being performed. The systems approach, on the other hand, also observes the activities, understands the situation, the activities and the reasons they're being performed, and then creates the reference model based on the activities that should be performed. Because if you base the model on what you see, you don't know if the activities that are doing are what they're supposed to be doing, and you don't know what activities they're supposed to be doing that they're not doing, because you have no standard of reference. And so in the systems approach, you create a reference model based on domain knowledge and discussions with the stakeholders and research in the literature. So my systemic and systematic process for crafting a degree or even a course is to look at the customer needs and the body of knowledge and the benchmarks from other universities, which gives me a sort of IV&V, some kind of test on what I'm doing. That gives me the subject matter for what I'm going to teach. I then look at factors that make the learning effective and the delivery mechanism, which gives me the pedagogy. I then deliver the classes. I then assess the teaching and learning results and go around the loop again. And this is the standard iterative loop for dealing with complex problems. I started to use asynchronous techniques in the classroom, both face-to-face and online, and students had access to the material from previous classes. Students in a class could get the handouts and other materials from there, and if they clicked on the email, it opened up an email window on their system and they could contact me. And I also put in a frequently asked questions area. I allowed points for participation in the online class by having the students submit a photograph, so there was a page where everybody could see everybody else. And since people didn't have ways of creating electronic images, I allowed them to send me a picture and I would scan it for them. Discussions were held asynchronously, much like you see on LinkedIn and Discord and other asynchronous groups these days. And I found some shareware software that allowed for voice over the internet protocol. And this was well before the days of Skype. And you could use the electronic handset on the screen and dial somebody and call them. And my ID, you can see up there, was 358947, and I'm online. So the software told you who was online as well as their numbers. So now let's look at the construction approach for the MSWE degree. I reused components from the existing MSWE courses and courses with the same content from other UMUC degree programs. Sometimes they were renamed by giving the MSWE number because MSWE had a higher perception of quality than CSMN, and created and promulgated low-cost ways of producing pre-recorded lectures for faculty and students in all the UMUC online classes using the resources provided by the Web Initiative in Teaching. Yes, the university had a lab where people could come in and record lectures, but not everybody could do it, and students especially couldn't. So I found Real Media had a plugin to PowerPoint that allowed lectures to be recorded. If people recorded the lectures using PowerPoint itself, the size of the files were humongous. And remember, in those days, 1200 baud was the nominal data transfer rate. And so you could not transfer very large files in a reasonable amount of time. But then it only worked in PowerPoint 95, and when Microsoft updated PowerPoint, Real Media decided they weren't going to have that plugin to PowerPoint anymore. They wanted everybody to use their streaming service. That left my replacement with the problem of providing that capability. I created the innovative new Final Team Project course, MSWE 617. Students were given the choice of projects, or they could propose one of their own. In one of the classes, one of the students worked in the Secret Service in the White House. His project dealt with a system the Secret Service used for scheduling agents on protection details. They were currently using a whiteboard, and he proposed to use the distributed computer network to schedule and inform the agents about the trips. The students' teams lived the software development process in the form of the waterfall from need to demonstration. Questions and comments were discussed in the Asynchronous class website as usual for online classes, and I showed you an example. The class was delivered as face-to-face in 1999 and face-to-face online hybrid with myself as the remote instructor a year later in 2000. The final project overview. It was the capstone course. It was a team exercise. This was an innovation. It was unique to UMUC. All the other institutions that were benchmarked and had final projects, it was an individual final project. The instructor doesn't teach. The students' teams are provided with a set of requirements for the project. They could suggest an alternative project, as I mentioned earlier, and the instructor is the customer. The students experience the system development process, part of the system development lifecycle. They produce documents and presentations. They create a working demonstration of the software. And it was manageable because these students are working full-time and they're only taking the degree part-time. And they thought that failing wasn't an option. Actually, the grades were set up so that the software didn't need to work in order for the students to pass the course. They had to demonstrate they knew what to do. And it was a 14 to a 15-week schedule, so they did really well. The class did not meet every session. There was a kickoff meeting, and then there were the milestone reviews. Operations concept review, system requirements review, preliminary design review, critical design review, delivery readiness review, and customer acceptance test. A year or so later, when I submitted a paper about the degree to a conference and I described what had happened, one of the reviewers' comments was, "It's too ambitious. His students could never do something like that." And the reviewer didn't seem to have read enough of the paper to read that the students had actually done it. So the web conference looked like this. You went to the website and you saw something like this. You could register. Guests could register so that other faculty in the institution, the dean and so on, could take a look at what was going on. Once in the atrium, you had a choice of attending sessions, exhibits, talking to participants, sending mail to special interest groups, and changing the registration info. And this is an administrator view, as you can see by the lower part of the menu. There was an exhibit hall. You went into the exhibit hall, clicked on the logo, and you were taken to the exhibitor or sponsor's website. These were dummy ones that I put in, although the Brighton and Cosi one was real. Once you went into the sessions, you could see sessions and how the sessions were rated by different people with different degrees of knowledge. It so happened that the team that did the web conference worked in the university's IT department, so they just built it as a seamless plugin to WebTyco. And so I took advantage of it in my class on software maintenance to enable the online students to present their presentations online using real media and asynchronously. So go into each presentation, look at the rating, and actually, if you were a registered participant, you could view the presentation, download the presentation, take part in the question and answer sessions, and rate the presentation. The software allowed registrants to join special interest groups. It allowed participants to talk to people who were interested in the same topics as they were, provided they had allowed their details to be shared when they registered. And this came in because when I attended INCOSE conferences before this particular set of requirements was derived, I generally found the people I wanted to talk to when we were sharing a taxi cab on the way back to the airport after the conference. It's very difficult for new people to meet like-minded people at conferences. The second iteration was the hybrid class. There were more student teams. There was one completely online team. Each milestone review would be presented using a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous techniques. This was different to the first class. And the formal presentations would be done asynchronously via WebTyco. The discussions would be face-to-face and via WebTyco. The face-to-face teams had the choice of meeting face-to-face or using WebTyco and other non-face-to-face techniques. But the WebTyco teams were prohibited from meeting face-to-face, even though some members would be in the local UMUC service area, because this was an experiment to see if it would work. And the students were told that if there were technical difficulties that held them up for some reason, it would not affect their grade. But there weren't any. And the instructor moved to the University of South Australia just before the course ran, and so he became an adjunct associate professor with UMUC for the duration of that course. The results. The instructor attended the early face-to-face meetings via telephone. Classes ran and students completed their projects. There were some initial technical teething problems which were fixed within a few days. It then settled down, and the students preferred the asynchronous to the synchronous approach. And I came out of those meetings with a feeling of loneliness. I wasn't involved in what the students were doing. And there was little, if any, difference between the WebTyco and the face-to-face teams in the quality of the products they produced. When the last session ran, they had refreshments and somebody produced a cake. And the downside of being a remote instructor was I didn't actually get to taste the cake. 6 years later, I was still trying to work on this as well as my other duties at UniSA. So the undesirable situation was the learning environment in classes on systems and software engineering was ineffective. There was the need to create an effective learning environment, and the assumptions were it's an applied research problem, so at the university I need a grant. Or I could do it getting a PhD, and I actually enrolled in a PhD program in the School of Education. And I needed to develop the product, that is what to teach, based on the activities that the systems and software engineering people were supposed to do in the workplace, and then an effective process on how to teach it. I can build on the prior work, and I've shared some of that with you. FCFDS is an effective learning environment on classes on systems and software engineering, and the research problem is what to do to transition to the FCFDS from the current classroom. The solution is how the problem was remedied, And that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this presentation and discuss a couple more systems thinking tools. Desirable situation is teaching systems engineers what they need to know to be outstanding in the workplace. And I found some of the skills that they needed outside the systems engineering literature. For example, the desirable situation was providing the 5 top aspects of the engineering design process that best equip secondary students to understand and manage and solve technological problems. And I found that those weren't even being taught at the tertiary level. They were multiple solutions to a problem or requirement, oral communications, graphical pictorial communication, ability to handle open-ended, ill-defined problems, systems thinking, and grading based on cognitive skills and knowledge in the university environment. And this meant incorporating the higher levels of the updated Bloom's taxonomy. So there's a hierarchy of needs here. The first need is to create a system to expedite the creation of outstanding systems engineers, some of whom will become technical leaders. This meant the need to determine what skills and competencies they need to have and how to fast-track learning that comes from experience. And the product, namely, is what knowledge outstanding systems engineers need to know and the best way for them to learn it. And I needed to construct a system and prototype it. And this is the agile or evolutionary system development process. So formulating the problem, the undesirable situation is the need to create a class in systems engineering using active learning, teaching systems thinking, and filling some of the gaps in the systems engineering knowledge that was currently taught. Because I often found myself when I was teaching, telling the students, and you won't find that in the textbooks. Well, I eventually wrote some textbooks where you will find it. The problem working backwards was win the grant, apply for the grant, write the grant proposal, locate institutions that offer grants in systems engineering, and there weren't any, so I had to find an institution that offered grants in areas that other institutions didn't offer grants. The solution was I wrote the grant together with Professor Phil John in Cranfield University in the UK, because UniSA had a teaming agreement with Cranfield, and the only place I found that offered such a grant was the Lever-Hume Trust in the UK. So we applied to the Lever-Hume Trust in the UK. We won the grant. Surprise, surprise. And then I moved to Cranfield in the UK to develop the course. One of the things I developed was the holistic thinking perspectives. This is a way to teach systems thinking. The undesirable situation between 2000 and 2006 was there's a need for systems thinking. There's lots of opinions on what it is in the literature, and I'm afraid that is still current. For example, what does it mean to think systemically? The answer to the question in the LinkedIn groups in 2020 was systems thinking is a way of thinking, you know it when you see it. And that's what I was teaching people in those 6 years. And I didn't think that was satisfactory, but at that time I couldn't really do anything about it. Another answer, approach to a system with love, understand it holistically and heuristically. Please tell me how to teach that. But the writer was Italian, so there may have been a problem with the use of English. And there was little being published on how to teach it, and accordingly it was not being taught or applied very well. And so there was the need to teach a methodology for applying systems thinking to remedy problems. So when we aggregated the opinions of what systems thinking was, I found systemic thinking, which was thinking about a system as a whole to gain an understanding of the system's relationships with adjacent systems and not as a whole to be taken apart. and the use of different perspectives by Barry Richmond. And it was Barry Richmond's 7 streams of systems thinking that led to the holistic thinking perspectives. Thank you, Barry. And then there was systematic thinking, which was employing a methodical step-by-step manner or process to think about something or to achieve a goal. And then there was the beyond systems thinking or holistic thinking approach to conceptualize solutions, which needed both systemic and systematic thinking. And the perspectives you need to understand the situation depend on the problem. And you need even more perspectives for solving the problem. So I developed the systems thinking perspectives, which turned into the holistic thinking perspectives. You can examine the situation from a number of perspectives. 8 of them are prescriptive, external, internal, progressive, and then there's the scientific perspective, which is the output of the thinking process, which is part of the remaining perspective. And let me explain what they are in the form of an example. Think about a camera. The big picture tells you where cameras are used and for what purpose. Operationally, you think about capturing images, transporting the camera, viewing the images, adjusting the settings, and charging the batteries. So the functions the camera does are capture the image, store the image, retrieving the image, deleting images, and the battery charging functions, and so on. From a structural perspective, you think about the camera body, the camera case, and the charger. These are the physical components. Generic, similar ways of capturing images, paintings, sketchings, and so on. Continuum, these are different types of models of cameras, different materials used to construct the camera, and so on. Temporal discusses the evolution of the image capturing media, starting with photographic plates to film to solid state memory. If you want, you could even start as far back as prehistoric times when images were captured on the wall of caves by paintings. The quantitative gives you the number of pixels per inch, the lens characteristics, and so on. And the scientific, well, that depends on the problem or the issue. So thinking about a camera, understanding how a camera works, we use the functional and structural perspectives, and the system of interest contains the camera. When I'm thinking about capturing images, I use the operational perspective, and the system of interest contains the camera and the operator and whatever is being photographed. And when I'm thinking about transporting the camera, it's another operational perspective, but a different system of interest. The camera, the operator, and the camera case. And again, recharging the camera is another operational perspective, but the system of interest is different again. It deals with the camera, the operator, and the charger. So I can abstract out non-relevant aspects of the system depending on what I'm thinking about. So when I'm thinking about the problem, I need to understand how a camera works. I use, again, the functional and structural system of interest, but all I think about is the camera. If the need is to capture image, then my system of interest is the camera and the operator. If the need is to transport a camera, my system of interest is the camera, operator, and camera case, and so on. The need to charge the camera, camera, operator, and charger. By using this technique, I can reduce the complexity because remember the don't care. Depending on my problem, I bound my system of interest, and all the other elements in that system are don't cares at that particular time. 4 different system of interests, 4 views of a system. Take your choice. One good way of using the holistic thinking perspectives is active brainstorming. You use the Kipling questions introduced by Rudyard Kipling. What, where, when, how, why, and who. And he introduced them in his poem, The Elephant's Child in the Just So Stories. You can create a matrix like so that you can copy out onto a business card and hold it in your hand, and it helps you when you're learning. So you run through each perspective and you examine the system of interest from that perspective. And as you become more experienced, you can jump from perspective to perspective as the answer to a question leads you to a new thought. And there may not be an immediate answer to every question. This is an input tool, not a storage tool. Don't try and store the answers back in the matrix. And when you don't have an answer to a question, you don't make an assumption. You do some research to find out the answer. And there are other sets of perspectives, but active brainstorming can be used with either of them. I'm just using this one set of perspectives in this presentation. So typical operational perspective questions from the systems thinking toolbox would be who's going to operate it or administer it? What do they need to operate? Under what conditions will it be operated? Where will they operate it? When will they operate it? Why will they operate it? How will they operate it? And so on. This is a lot better than brainstorming because it's guided brainstorming in a sense. So when you mention the topic, there's going to be an immediate reaction with a set of ideas. This is a traditional brainstorming session. Don't interfere with those initial flow of ideas, just write them down. Don't force the ideas into the HTPs when you're writing them down. Put them on a whiteboard, computer tool, whatever you want to use. You can sort them out later. Once you're doing the active brainstorming, don't force the ideas into the HTPs during the active brainstorming session. Do it later as appropriate. The first time I introduced this in a class in Singapore, there were 7 teams in the class and they were given a topic to brainstorm, and you can see the first column that gave the number of ideas. But after active brainstorming, you can see how the number of ideas improved tremendously. That second team went from 9 to 89, and that 7th team went from 20 to too many to count. They were just too lazy, so they messed up my data table. So in summary, you're applying systems and critical thinking when you're reasoning about things, when others don't, and you see patterns in unrelated things. You see ambiguity, which is really good when you're writing and discussing requirements. And you develop a strange sense of humor. You tell poor jokes, but you see solutions instead of problems by different or combinations of viewpoints, and by changing the viewpoints on the problem. The Far Side cartoons by Gary Larson are great examples of humor by viewing things from a different perspective. Remember the old joke, those that can do, those that can't teach? Here's a slightly different perspective. Those that can do, those that can't do discuss on LinkedIn and various other places. Those that can't discuss write standards. Those that can't write standards follow standards and or encourage others to follow standards. Those that can't follow standards make excuses. Those that make the best excuses get promoted. So coming back to the research, the goal of the program is to graduate people who can conceptualize and realize and later lead the realization of the solution systems the stakeholders actually need. People in the program would be at different levels of the organization, so not everybody is running the project. They have to be able to develop the reputations for success to be able to be promoted into those leadership positions. So we can characterize them as successful problem solvers, successful organizers, successful leaders, successful innovators, successful thinkers, and successful entrepreneurs once they get into the upper management levels of the organization. And the goal of the program is also to utilize and inculcate the systems approach, both content and pedagogy. So the first class I developed was called Integrated Multiplanary Discipline for the 21st Century. The topics were what a multiplanary discipline, interdisciplinary engineering and systems engineering, why projects fail, an introduction to life cycles, a framework for understanding systems engineering, the competencies of a systems engineer, systems engineering in the needs definition phases of the system life cycle, in the requirements phases, in the design phases, in the integration phases, in the test and evaluation phases, and the operations and maintenance phases. A module on modeling and simulation, and a wrap-up and the student presentations. Systems thinking was taught in one of the earlier modules. So the structure of the course covered systems engineering, systems thinking, and communications. There was the context of systems engineering, what they did in each phase of the system life cycle, and some of the tools they used for solving systems engineering problem. Then there was systems thinking and the systems thinking perspectives as it was then. It became holistic thinking perspectives later and active brainstorming. And then there were the communications. There were the team activities and the presentations and the need to communicate with the instructor. For example, the requirements for team membership. Between 4 and 6 people, 1 male, 1 female, 1 with a laptop, 1 young, 1 mature, less than 2 from the same company or organization, and less than 2 from the same country. Think about why are those requirements for team membership? Well, the first requirement keeps the team manageable. Males and females view things from different perspectives. 1 with a laptop. There were several times I taught a class, mentioned these requirements, and somebody got up, left the room, and came back to with a laptop in different situations. Students made an assumption that the laptop had to be in the room at the time. When somebody asked about what was the definition of young and mature, I said, make an assumption. And they made an assumption, and the assumptions were all different. So the students learned about the need for clarification of the requirements. Again, same company, organization, and country have different ways of doing it, so they were exposed to different ways of doing things. The results, when the course ran in Cranfield in November 2007, it ran in the executive weekly block mode, 5 days. 8 students took part, and they were beginning the engineering doctorate program. The students went into initial shock at the workload when I told them what they would be doing. But they coped with it. And as the class progressed, learning appeared to be better than in the earlier lecture-centric classes. In fact, day 2 here in Cranfield was like day 5 at UniSA. A tremendous improvement. And the overall student evaluations were positive. In fact, 7 out of 8 students recommended that other classes be converted to the format. Wow. I ran the class again at NUS in January and May 2008 before I joined them full-time. Again, executive weekly block mode. In January, there were 50 students. In May, there were 15 students. Because I had 50 students in the class, I couldn't take as much time with each team as I wanted. And I didn't realize until halfway through the class that one of the teams was not communicating with me at all. Remember that little bit of vagueness in there? When the students made their final presentations, that team that didn't communicate had a totally different presentation to everybody else. They had created the wrong system. It was a very graphic lesson in learning the need for communication to create the solution system the stakeholder needs. And I felt bad for those students. But the similar initial response as in Cranfield, mainly that students were complaining about the course workload. There was a similar improvement in learning and similar daily student comments. I took comments at the end of each day and I fed them back to the students the following morning so that the class could realize what other people were feeling in this new and strange learning environment. The overall evaluations were positive. You can see the smiling faces doing one of the exercises in January. When I asked for that daily feedback at the end of the day and shared it with the next morning, here's the best part of day one. Rather than being lectured at, the learning was more group-based, allowing us to learn and understand more fully. Very involved, meaning that even though it was very intense and a struggle at times, it didn't allow me to switch off, which meant the learning curve was so much steeper. Satisfaction of developing skills that I actually can apply to my work immediately. Interactive learning approach. Students liked it. End of class comments from two courses, one run in Brunei and one run in and one of them run in Singapore. I've learned to look at problems using systems thinking perspectives and generate ideas based on different perspectives. I learned systems thinking, critical thinking, holistic thinking, different perspectives, and introduced a broad coverage of systems engineering. The course teaches me on how to think holistically and manage ideals. The course teaches me on how to think holistically and manage ideas and using the tools to organize raw ideas and apply to dealing with problems. And the original typo in ideals is kept in the presentation. Applying techniques learned through exercises, brainstorming techniques, applying systems thinking to real problems. Systematic concepts for identifying problems, brainstorming for solutions, etc. The N-square chart, OARP, FRAT, Spark are tools that I haven't talked about in this lecture in systems engineering. More importantly, I have learned new perspectives to look at a systems thinking perspectives. Nice. So far so good. The knowledge has been identified. The skills and competencies have more or less been identified. The teaching has been improved using active learning, but we still need to overcome the defect in the flipped classroom and to accelerate the experience. Flipped classroom, the idea is take the lecture out of the classroom, pre-record it, and use the class time for activity. This was the NUS IT department view of the flipped classroom. However, the assumption may be invalid doing a failure mode analysis because I learned as early as 1997 that students don't read the material before they come to class. So flipped classroom is based on wishful thinking rather than reality. And why 10 minutes? When I looked at that, I went back and checked all my pre-recorded lecture times and I found that the average was about half an hour because the students can stop the lecture at any time. If they get bored, if they get tired, if they get interrupted, and then they can pick it up again. So the module components of the class were the lecture between 2 and 10% of the time. I'd gone overboard with the first class and went back to putting a little more lecture in there. The readings included in the practicals, because the bulk of knowledge comes from the textbook and the papers, and the practicals provide opportunity to practice skills. So in that early class, they had to read the book and then do the exercise. And these were the introductory practicals in modules 1 to 5, and then they had to do a project to actually perform systems engineering in the later projects. And then they also had to do a staffing project, and they learned what constitutes a good resume and a poor resume at the same time. And this was the project in which that one team at NUS produced the wrong system. And then each class had presentations. Each team was given less than 10 minutes, and then we discussed the presentation. And in the face-to-face classes, the presentations were done on flipboards. And they took the sheets and they put them up on the wall of the room, and then they talked around them so people could see the different presentations, and they were all acceptable answers to the same problem, even though they were different. So they learned about acceptable answers. And this gave the communication skills and learning from and about other perspectives. I then introduced something I called knowledge readings. It was introduced as a team exercise from 2011 to 2014 in my class on Management of Technology and Innovation. It overcomes the defect in the flipped classroom, and it ensures that the student read the material assigned for the exercise. Because lectures are based on material in books, conferences, and journals, and what I did was I required the students in teams to create the lecture I would have given using an instructor-provided template. And it helps them order the material read so that when they look at those knowledge readings from the different teams on the same material, they could see differences in what the students perceived in the material and how they presented it. And it encourages them to think about the material they've read, and they also have to find other sources for the same material and think about it. It used the copycat tool, adapted from the requirements to present a chapter in the book from my 1998 to 1999 UMUC classes, and requirements to summarize a video individual exercise from my 2010 to 2014 NUS graduate class on Management of Technology and Innovation, when I stopped teaching the class. What the students had to do was to watch a video from the BBC program Connections and present summaries of the DVDs in teams from session 3 to session 13. And one episode per team. And each video was linked to a session in the class. And it was one episode per team. The call numbers for the documents were in the study guide, and the students could get the DVDs from the library if they got there first, or try and find them somewhere else. And I had them email my choice of episode and session after forming the teams, and as usual, I told them the earlier presentations would be graded less strictly than the later presentations, because the later presentations would have the benefits of comments made on the earlier presentations. And it was first come, first served. They had to see the study guide, what was doing in it, and they had to retell the story in 4 parallel streams. The undesirable situation, the desirable situation, that the innovation in the CD resolved, what was the problem and what was the solution. And they could actually show the chain of problem, solution, problem, solution. And notice how the problem formulation template is coming into there, even though it wasn't developed formally until much later. A typical knowledge reading has evolved over time to something like this. Prepare a brief on 2 main points in reading 602. Presentation to campaign. The reformulated problem according to the problem formulation template. A summary of the content of the reading. The compliance matrix. This slide and version number of the session, because sessions get updated as time goes by. A list of the main points. the two briefings. Because when they're making a briefing in class, it gets boring when you get lots of briefings on the same point. So after 2 or 3 briefs on the same point, I could switch to the second point if different knowledge readings were on the same points. Reflections and comments on the reading. Comparison of content with other readings and external knowledge. Have them think about why the reading was assigned to the module and the lessons learned from the session and the source of the learning. They had to save it as a PowerPoint and post it or email it as and where instructed in the class. So there's a lot of the higher Bloom's level skills required here. And then when the class met, they would brief on one main point. The structure here is different to the previous one. I wrote it up as the balanced classroom. Lecture and knowledge readings, which at the time I put this together was called blended learning. There were exercises. They were designed for authentic assessment and workplace emulation, which I haven't talked about. And then the assessment was based on individual assignments, teamwork, and there was the feedback at the end of each session that I mentioned earlier. Students were asked to tell me what the best thing about the session was, the worst thing in their opinion, if there was something they expected and was missing, if they have a question or a comment that they didn't make in class, but they thought about it after class, it could be addressed at the beginning of the next class. And every class sessions, except for the first one, started with a BWMQC session where I shared the feedback. So the solution situation with the knowledge readings helped very much with Bloom's taxonomy. You don't know from the lecture because there's no feedback. The exercises tell me whether the students are remembering, understanding, and applying, and the knowledge reading exercise tell me about all 6 levels of the updated Bloom's taxonomy. In summary, knowledge readings provide 3 of the 5 top aspects of the engineering design process, from Wickline, multiple solutions to a problem, oral communications, and graphical pictorial communication. They allow students to exercise the cognitive skills at levels 3 to 6 of the upgraded version of Bloom's taxonomy. And they demonstrate that different people perceive information differently and enable the instructor to correct any misinterpretations as they arise. And they provide a better learning experience from the students. And the downside is it needs knowledgeable and confident instructors, because the instructor has to understand what the instructor is teaching and not just teach the textbook, because the instructor has to critique the knowledge. Last tool I want to share is the compliance matrix. It's basically a list of requirements and where the requirements have been met. So here are the requirements: knowledge of systems engineering, multiple solutions to a problem, oral communications, graphical pictorial communications, ability to handle open-ended, ill-defined problems, systems thinking, cognitive skills, and teamwork. And you can see from where each one is met in between the lecture, the exercises, knowledge reading, and individual assignment, and how it's met. Another version of the compliance matrix is a list of requirements and in which slide the students have met those requirements. By some coincidence, in December 2020, Howard Eisner published this book, What Makes Systems Engineers Successful. He based it on a survey of INCOSE fellows. It provides a description of how and why systems engineers can be and have been successful. It offers successful attributes, focuses on the key positive qualities, drills down to the success features to aim for, the failure characteristics to avoid, and sets a model for achievement and behavior for future systems engineers to follow a successful path. And when I did a benchmarking study on different degrees in systems engineering in 2013, none of this was being taught as per the website descriptions of the content of the courses, because it doesn't deal with systems engineering knowledge, which is pretty much what is taught in the traditional. And notice my class provides all this. So far, so good. Introduced active learning and knowledge reading, and now I have to accelerate the experience. So now we come to the next problem. From active brainstorming, the key question is, how does someone gain experience? The answer is directly from one's own experience or indirectly from somebody else's experience. And that can be in the literature or via a dialogue with the experienced personnel. Or make an assumption or a hypothesis. Individuals can learn from others' experiences. We find that in the master-apprentice model, where the apprentices learn from the master. And this learning environment will accelerate experience. The problem then becomes the need to prototype a learning environment in which selected students not only learn the specific knowledge, but can also share experiences and learn from the shared experience. Structure and delivery. Class is running. Synchronous live weekly Zoom scheduled group sessions, and each session is recorded for use as a resource, and this has been running since December 2020, and there is a vast amount of tacit, undocumented knowledge and experience that is available in those recordings, and one day I will use AI to generate transcripts and write them up. The exercise emulate the real world. There's exercises and knowledge reading presentations, and so there's immediate correction on misinterpretations. We can have members discuss real-world problems which are out-of-the-box experiences in other applications domains. So people in the course are not necessarily from the same domain. Learning by absorption fast-tracks learning and experience. There are asynchronous short pre-recorded lectures, and they are also asynchronous discussion in a private LinkedIn group. These allow thinking time before responding. One of the big advantage of asynchronous communications is there's time to think before responding. People can put in notices of interest and references to additional material of interest and resources. There are also one-on-one sessions available. It's self-paced for individual. There's no requirement to complete an exercise every week. However, they have to beware procrastination and use just in time. There's no time limit. And new participants can join at any time, so there's continuous enrollment. So at any one session, I have no idea what is going to be presented, whether we're going to discuss a member problem, whether we're going to discuss a knowledge reading or an exercise from an early session or a later session. So the newcomers coming in are exposed to later session exercises, and they learn by absorption as well as from their particular sessions and modules. Access is through the portal. There are 4 programs. Members can access any session in any program, because when you're dealing with a project or trying to understand how to be a good systems engineer, a good manager, or a good problem solver, you're looking at the problem solving process from different perspectives in different domains. By learning and understanding what's happening in those other boxes, you get experience in those other boxes, knowledge in those other boxes, and you can start providing out-of-the-box solutions in your box. The weekly session covers topics from all programs, and it meets the need for multidisciplinary knowledge, and creating outstanding problem solvers is a prerequisite for both the project manager and systems engineering class, because that's what project managers and systems engineers do. They solve problems. The lessons learned so far, it's postgraduate. It doesn't fit in a university environment. It's not for everybody. I offered it free at the beginning, and free doesn't work. People drop out. And there's no need to complete an exercise before presenting it. It's actually preferable not to. So we work through what's the exercise about, what needs to be done. It's emulating the workplace environment where you're working with a team and discussing what you're doing. Members show progress very quickly, but they need time to adjust. It's a totally new learning environment. It also allows for in-depth discussions that you can't do in a weekly session class because you don't have it. We could spend the whole session discussing a minute detail of a difference in wording in a requirement, which you can't do in a traditional class. It can be a lot of fun as well as educational, and it is. But further research is needed to find the optimal class size. I keep the class size small to allow all this in-depth interactivity going on. But it would be nice to take it a step further, get more people into the class, and see what the limits really are. It's not for everybody. Instructors, every session is different. The member presentations, real-world problems, experience, and so on. So they need to be knowledgeable, experienced, and able to guide members in reaching solutions, in actually creating knowledge rather than telling them the knowledge. It's more of a mentor-mentee relationship. And I'm not sure instructors could make a living doing it. I'm not doing it for the money, as you'll find out. Members, there is a high applicant rejection and initial dropout rate because not everybody is qualified for the class and not everybody can cope with it for some reason. Members need the right aptitude and experience. They need to be internally motivated to learn and succeed. This is not for minimum level of effort students who have to be pushed or pulled in order to do the work. If anybody in this class doesn't do the exercises, I sort of remind them about it, but I don't push them to do it. Which brings me to how you might be able to develop the skills to use the 8 tools. Do you want to be outstanding? Are you interested in becoming an outstanding project manager, IT consultant, system or software engineer? Find out if you can. Join me in a small select group for at least 30 days for free. Full access to all 4 programs. You can find them on therightrequirement.com, my website. It's affordable anywhere in the world. I did a study as to what would be affordable anywhere in the world. If I charge $5,000 for the course, which is what people told me to charge, then it would be limited to people in the US and people who could convince their employers in the rest of the world to pay for the course. And I wanted this to be attractive enough so that people could pay their own way. So I ended up charging the cash equivalent of 42 cups of coffee in their local cafe each month in their local currency. It's affordable. It might bite just a little, and that's the optimum value. If you're interested, contact me for a personal Zoom meeting to find out more and see if it's for you. Use the contact form on my website. So in summary, I discussed 8 system thinking tools that I developed as part of the research in the context of creating outstanding systems engineers and project managers as a complex problem, and discussed some of what I went through in the different university and ended up with how you might be able to develop the skills to use the tools and others. The Systems Thinkers Toolbox contains more than 100 tools for problem-solving, decision-making, systems engineering, and project management. It was published 6 years ago. It's based on 20-plus years of research and practice and available directly from CRC Press or Amazon. I had an idea. I said, let me look at the distribution of the HTPs in all the books. It's real easy to find them because I could do a word search in the PDF file. And I found that in the Systems Thinkers Toolbox, it looked like this. Traditional systems thinking deals with the big picture, operational, functional, and structural perspectives. But look how low they are compared to the other perspectives. Because the book is providing tools for creating solutions, not tools for understanding the situation. And the solutions come from the generic and the continuum perspectives. In my book on systemic and systematic project management, again, generic and continuum are way up there because managers are solving problems. And managers are dealing with the operations and functions being performed in the projects. On the other hand, the systems engineering book contains a lot of references to the operational perspective because systems engineering are visualizing systems in operation, understanding the current system in the current situation, and conceptualizing the solution system. And they also use a lot of generic and continuum perspectives to create their solutions. And in the risk management book, you can see functional and structural come way up because people are looking at risks in functions and structures, failures, and so on. Quantitative perspective is way up because all these risks and probabilities are assigned numbers, and it's temporal because they're looking into what could happen in the future. I found that real interesting. My thanks to Bruce Lerner and Daniel Zhivkovitz for comments and suggestions made during the creation of this presentation. More detailed information on what I did in creating those degrees and developing the different asynchronous learning techniques and the systems thinking tools and the holistic thinking perspectives may be found in my YouTube video channel and in my publications. Thank you for listening, and I now turn this over to Daniel to initiate the question and comment session.